People, what's the secret you discovered that made you leave your ex? His addiction to camgirl sites. It was something I never expected, and the way I found out was nothing short of shocking. It all came to light when his credit card bill finally became too much to hide. The card was tied to his bank account, and he had already maxed out its insane limit. At this point, the bank had started taking 80% of his paychecks just to pay down the balance. When I saw the bill, I could hardly believe it. Over $150,000. I had no idea how it had gotten this bad, but what was worse was that he could no longer contribute to our household bills because the bank was garnishing his wages to pay off the debt. Honestly, it was hard to wrap my head around. Pornhub is free, and OnlyFans wasn't even a thing yet. This was back in 2015, before that exploded. How on earth do you rack up a debt of $150,000 on camgirl sites? And the craziest part? He'd been doing it all in secret. It wasn't like he was hiding it from me just for a few weeks. We were together every waking moment, except when we were at work. 9.5 years together, and I couldn't even begin to fathom where he'd been watching or interacting with these sites. Was he sneaking off to the bathroom at work or something? How did he even think he could get away with this? It felt like a slap in the face. Not only had he ruined our relationship, but he had tanked his credit and credibility all at once. Story 2. The red flags I had been ignoring finally became undeniable when I made the decision to leave my ex after enduring a brutal physical altercation the night before. As I went through the house to gather my most important items, I stumbled upon a box that hadn't been there when we moved in 6 months earlier. Curiosity and dread gripped me as I opened it, only to find my best friend's innerwears. But that wasn't all. I also found my ex's co-worker's inners, a woman I had been told was just a co-worker, nothing more, along with toys, toy boxes with missing items, and my own clothes that my ex had claimed must have disappeared. Only then did I realize those two women had been wearing my clothes when theirs got dirty during their encounters. My best friend's inners were easy to identify. I had done her laundry for months when she didn't have a washer and dryer, so I knew exactly where they came from. My ex had never done her laundry, so there was no way he could have just stumbled upon them. The way my best friend acted toward me at times now made sense. Her sudden coldness explained that she was angry I was home and interfering with her attempts to sleep with my ex. Then, there was the co-worker, Kiana, whose luxury innerwears were custom printed with her name. The evidence was in front of me, and it shattered my trust in both of them. It was at that moment I realized I couldn't even trust my so-called friends, people who knew I was being beaten and abused, yet still chose to sleep with my ex. I had no regrets about leaving after that. Since then, I found my now husband, who treats me with love and respect, and we have a beautiful son together. I don't look back on my past anymore. I left every one of those friends behind, and now I'm happier than I've ever been, focusing on my little family. Story 3. She had been talking to a guy in another state, and I had no idea. Everything seemed fine until one day she casually dropped that she liked him better than me. He was planning to come visit her, and that's when everything came to light. I found out about him right then. She didn't try to hide it, or even apologize. Instead, she pretty much told me that he wasn't going to be happy to see me around, and that I should just leave. I was taken aback, but I did what she asked. I left. But the joke was on her. When the guy finally arrived, it wasn't to sweep her off her feet like she thought. Instead, he told her that he had met someone else back home and was breaking up with her. Talk about a complete turn of events. He left, and she was left alone, realizing that the guy she had been so infatuated with wasn't interested in her at all. Then, just like that, she came crawling back to me. She tried to act like nothing had happened, apologizing and begging for another chance. As much as a part of me wanted to take her back and give her another shot, something inside me couldn't do it. I couldn't trust her anymore. The way she had treated me, disrespecting our relationship, running off to someone else without hesitation, left a scar that couldn't be healed just by an apology. It was hard to let go, but I knew deep down that I deserved better than someone who could betray me so easily. Story 4. I always had this gut feeling something was off. It started with him liking all of her posts on Facebook, but barely acknowledging anything I posted. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just the algorithm, right? I convinced myself I was overthinking things. But then came that one night, during a get-together with our friends. My heart sank when I saw her walk through the door. I managed to hold it together for a few hours, but it became so hard to ignore the way they lit up when they talked to each other. Every interaction between them made my stomach churn. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself and ran to the bathroom, feeling like I was going to throw up. I locked myself in and tried to get a grip. Maybe I was overreacting, I told myself. Maybe it was just the anxiety from my previous relationship ending with him cheating that was clouding my judgment. I spent nearly an hour locked in that bathroom, crying. Not once did he come looking for me. Not once did he check if I was okay. Eventually, I gathered myself together and went back out, but I didn't see either of them at first. I don't know why, but something inside me compelled me to look for them. And there they were, together, on top of each other, practically all over each other. Neither of them even acknowledged me. They just stood there, staring blankly at the wall as if I wasn't even in the room. They didn't say a word, didn't even flinch. When I confronted him about it, he denied everything. He said she was just drunk and that he was only being there for her. It was infuriating. I wanted to scream that I needed him to be there for me, that I was the one hurting. But I knew there was no point. His words didn't even make sense. It was clear he was just saying whatever he thought would end the conversation the quickest, not because he cared. He didn't care. Even his friends admitted what they saw, but it didn't change anything. Now, she's his girlfriend, and I've never been able to love anyone since. That trust was shattered, and so was I. Story 5. I had a friend who went through one of the most bizarre and painful experiences I've ever seen. His wife left him after 3 years of marriage for some guy who she met online through World of Warcraft, a guy she'd never even met in real life. She packed her bags, moved across the country without a second thought, and went to be with this guy. It was a total gut punch for my friend, as you can imagine. But what made it even worse was that he didn't have much of a support system outside of me, my brother, and 2 other guys we knew, who were also brothers. So aside from us, he was basically alone in the world. The guy had been pretty much an orphan for as long as I'd known him, and we'd met his kids. He'd never really had a solid family structure, but when he got married, it seemed like he finally found a new family in her. Her 3 sisters and their single mom all took him in and treated him like a brother. To watch him go from that to being left behind was gut-wrenching. But here's where things get interesting. While my friend was devastated, his ex's mom and sisters felt terrible about the whole thing. They couldn't stand seeing him so broken, so they kept hanging out with him to offer support. As time went on, my friend ended up spending a ton of time with his ex's mom, and to everyone's surprise, they actually ended up hooking up. It was honestly kind of funny, considering the circumstances, but looking back, it's clear they were a better match than the one he had with his ex. And then there's the ex. She was 100% catfished by the guy she left her husband for. The irony of the whole situation was that everyone could see she was being catfished, but she refused to admit it. It was painfully obvious to everyone around her. The guy she was with, this rich business owner who supposedly lived in a big beach house, didn't even come close to fitting the image he painted. He was at least 15 years older than he claimed, didn't own any business, and his house on the beach was just a regular house 2 miles from the beach, owned by his mom, with whom he still lived. To top it all off, she basically gaslit herself. She refused to accept the truth, convincing herself that she'd always known the truth and was still happy with this guy. Some people just can't face the fact that they were wrong, no matter how clear the signs are. As for my friend, he's still with his ex's mom. Honestly, they make a really cute couple, and they're a lot of fun to hang around. Sure, it might sound a little trashy, but getting to know them, it's clear they're a much better match than she ever was for him. Sometimes, life has a way of throwing crazy curveballs, but in this case, it seems like the right people ended up together after all. Story 6. Her secret heart was something I never saw coming. She wanted to be a traditional wife. In my 30s, I was working a solid, well-paying union job as a welder in a shipyard, something I genuinely loved. I owned my own home, had no debt other than the mortgage, and our car was fully paid for. Life was pretty good, and I had a sense of stability I valued. She worked as a sushi waitress a few times a week, earning the extra fun money for us and a little more for her personal hobbies. Things were easy, relaxed. We shared a car, which wasn't a big deal because our shifts never overlapped. If she needed it one day, she'd take it to work in the morning at 5 a.m., and I would pick it up after my shift. We managed just fine like that. A couple of years passed, and she started talking about going back to school. I thought it was fantastic. She'd been through some rough experiences in public school, so we spent a lot of time discussing it. She decided to start small, taking one community college art class. It was low stakes, creative, and aligned with her interests. She loved it. I was thrilled for her. Then, she wanted more. She wanted to dive into full-time classes. We sat down together, reviewed our finances, and looked at the options. I could easily pick up some overtime shifts, so I committed to picking up a couple extra shifts a month, and she would drop to 1 sushi shift a week. It meant our finances would be tighter, but it seemed worth it. She was really blossoming, and that made it all feel like it was for a good cause. But then the next quarter came, and things started to shift again. She decided that she needed her own car to make things work, so she could take the classes she wanted. Sharing a car, she felt, was too limiting. So we took a fresh look at our finances, trying to figure out how to make that happen. The only way to cover the cost of a new car for her was for her to earn $300 more a month, or for me to take on a 6-day work week every week. I told her I couldn't do that. Shipyard welding is tough, physical work. Working 6 days a week wasn't something I was willing to commit to for long periods. That's when her secret heart was revealed. She looked at me with rage in her eyes and said, "I will never work as hard as you. I will never earn as much as you. You have to take care of me that way, and you need to get used to it now." In that moment, everything changed. I realized I didn't have a partner who saw our relationship as a 50-50 partnership. She didn't want to share the load equally. She wanted me to provide for her in a way she wasn't willing to work for herself. It was a bitter realization that shattered the picture of our future together. 10 years had built up to that moment. 7 years of marriage, trust, and dreams for the future. And in one instant, that foundation was gone. I couldn't be the one to carry us both for the rest of my life, and I didn't want to. I filed for divorce 3 months later. I walked away and never looked back. Story 7. She had planned to go out with her friends one night, and I wasn't feeling great. I had a headache and wasn't in the mood to go anywhere, so I decided to stay in and relax. She had messed up before, and I wasn't going to make the same mistake of blindly trusting her without any sort of backup. So, we were doing the whole location sharing thing to keep tabs on each other. Little did I know that would come back to bite me in the worst way. She went to this guy's house again and didn't come home until 5 a.m. I had suspected something was going on, but I didn't act on it right away. The truth was, I didn't actually have a headache. I had a gut feeling she was talking to him again, and for some messed up reason, I decided to let it happen. It was a Friday night, and as hard as it was to swallow, I knew what I had to do. The next night, we had dinner planned with her parents, who were visiting from out of town. I figured I'd suffer through the night, start working on finding a new place to live, and then by the next week, I'd just disappear. Saturday night came, and we were at dinner. Her mom, oblivious to what had just happened, casually said, "Let me know when you want to propose and I'll give you my ring." My ex nudged me with a grin and said, "Yeah, when are you going to ask, huh?" I couldn't help myself. I laughed. The irony of the situation was too much to handle, knowing she had been with someone else less than 24 hours before, while her mom was talking about us getting married. The next morning, Sunday, she started in on me about the dishes. I was already at my breaking point. She was nitpicking, and I had had enough. I couldn't take it anymore, so I just looked at her and said, "So, where were you Friday night?" She turned white. I could see the guilt flooding her face, and I knew I had finally caught her. Story 8. The call came out of nowhere, a number I didn't recognize flashing across my screen. At first, I thought it was a telemarketer or maybe just the wrong number. But the voice on the other end quickly made it clear this was something far worse. The man introduced himself as my husband's business associate, though it didn't take long to figure out what kind of business he meant. He went on to explain, almost casually, that my husband had been buying cocaine from him, a lot of it. My heart sank as he told me the habit was costing $3,000 a week. My husband had been blowing through money like it was nothing, and worse, he hadn't even been paying what he owed. The dealer informed me that my husband was now deep in debt, and it wasn't just a matter of dollars and cents anymore. The dealer's tone shifted slightly, becoming sharper, more menacing as he added, "We know which school bus your kid rides." My stomach dropped, and I felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. That one sentence shattered any illusion that this was a problem I could somehow contain or manage. It wasn't just about my husband anymore. It was about my child, our family, and the very real danger we were now in. Story 9. I caught a glimpse of a message preview on her lock screen. It was from some guy, and he had heart-reacted to a message she sent that read, "At least you know whenever I'm with him, I'm thinking of you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What made it worse was the timing. We had just returned from a holiday celebrating our anniversary, a trip that was supposed to mark a new chapter in our relationship. To top it off, we had recently taken a big step by moving in together. I thought we were building something solid, something real. But now, seeing that message, I couldn't help but question everything. Story 10. The guy she was cheating on me with eventually found out about me. One night, he tracked me down at a bar, approached me, and told me everything. He didn't come at me with anger or hostility. Instead, he was calm, almost respectful. He even bought me a drink. We talked for a while, and he laid it all out, sparing me the weeks, maybe months, of uncertainty and suspicion I would have gone through otherwise. As soon as he finished, I didn't hesitate. I stepped outside, got on the phone, and ended it with her right then and there. No arguments, no drawn-out conversations. I was done. I'm not going to go into all the details of what he shared, but I will say this. It was refreshing, in a messed-up way, to have an honest and honorable guy warn me instead of letting me stay in the dark. Looking back, I realize how close I was to making a huge mistake. I was about to sign a lease and get an apartment with her, thinking our future was solid. Thank God, I dodged a bullet there. Story 11. I remember sitting with a friend, feeling proud as I bragged about my relationship in front of my girlfriend. I told him that in the 2 years we had been dating, we had only ever had one fight. I thought it was a testament to how strong and healthy our relationship was. But then, she spoke up, casually and without hesitation, as if what she was about to say was no big deal. She said the reason we never fought wasn't because we were so perfect for each other. It was because she didn't care enough about me to bother fighting over anything. Her words hit like a slap in the face, and I didn't know how to respond. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what she had just admitted so nonchalantly. What makes it even worse is what I learned later. After the relationship ended, I found out she had been cheating on me. All that time, while I was convinced we had something special, she was betraying me behind my back. In hindsight, her comment about not caring enough to fight should have been a huge red flag, but I was too blind, or maybe too hopeful, to see it for what it really was. Story 12. Just 3 months after uprooting our entire family, our 3 kids and the 2 of us, and moving to another state for a fresh start, everything came crashing down. She started cheating and ended up getting pregnant with another man's child. It was devastating, but it didn't stop there. She had that child with the guy she was cheating with, and for a while, it seemed like she had moved on to start a new life with him. But then, history repeated itself. She cheated on him too, this time getting pregnant again. Except this time, she had twins. In just 7 years, she ended up having 6 kids with 3 different people. That's just the number I know of. It's hard to even wrap my head around how someone could make decisions like that, especially when so many innocent lives are involved. Watching it all unfold, especially after thinking we were building a stable life together, was a mix of heartbreak, anger, and disbelief. Those years were chaos, to say the least, but I've learned the hard way that not everyone you build a life with has the same vision for the future. Story 13. He was married, with a young son. I had no idea at the time, but everything started unraveling when I came across a box of wedding photos in his apartment. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it, only to find a picture of him, standing as the groom, holding the bride. When I confronted him about it, he tried to play it off, telling me that he wasn't actually the groom, just the best man. As if that would make any sense, right? He honestly expected me to believe that the guy in the wedding photo was somehow just there to give a speech, not as the actual husband. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it. That was the moment everything clicked for me, and I knew I couldn't stay in that situation any longer. I grabbed my stuff, caught the train home immediately, and didn't look back. But the lies didn't end there. It turned out that not only was he married, but he also wasn't the age he claimed to be. I had thought he was in his early 20s, but in reality, he was 30, much older than he'd let on. At that point, I realized the guy was just a complete bellend, lying about his life, his age, and even trying to make me believe something as ridiculous as him not being the groom in his own wedding photo. It was a whole mess of deception, and I had no time for it. I was done. Story 14. I stumbled across something that I'll never forget. Her and her sister texting back and forth about birth control. At first, I thought it might just be some casual conversation, but as I read more closely, it became clear what they were discussing. The sister was planning on deliberately sabotaging her own birth control, also that the guy she was with would stay. It wasn't just some offhand comment either. They were planning it out. When I confronted her about it, she tried to brush it off, saying, "It's okay. She's just trying to make sure he stays." As if intentionally messing with someone's health and future could be justified that easily. I was furious, but also completely disgusted by what I had just uncovered. I didn't waste a second longer. I grabbed my things and left so fast, it probably looked like there was smoke trailing behind me. I kept thinking about that conversation afterward, especially the part about the sister's boyfriend. I wish I knew who he was because I would have warned him in a heartbeat. He had no idea that the woman he was with had planned something so manipulative and harmful. It's crazy to think about how people can lie and scheme, not just to get what they want, but at the expense of someone else's well-being. Story 15. It all happened so quickly, and I didn't mean for it to go down like this. I was just using his computer for something, nothing out of the ordinary, when I accidentally opened his Google Drive instead of my own. What I saw next was nothing short of shocking. The first thing that caught my attention were the folders. So many of them, all meticulously labeled with names. I thought maybe it was some work-related stuff, or just random documents. But as I looked closer, my stomach sank. Each folder contained unclothed pictures of different women. The labels on the folders matched their names, and there were over 10 women, maybe more. There were even a couple of men in there, too, mixed in with the women. As if that wasn't enough of a gut punch, some of these women I recognized. Some of them were my friends. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It felt like a violation, like a whole secret life was unfolding right in front of me. Story 16. The coworker my ex was so worried about me being attracted to? I was. But here's the thing. Despite the attraction, I never let it go beyond work-related conversations. When he made a move, I shut him down immediately. I respected my relationship and the boundaries that should come with it. I was never the type to let those kinds of feelings compromise what I had. Fast forward, and my ex, who had always been insecure about this coworker, ended up making the worst decision. A female coworker gave him the slightest bit of attention, and almost immediately, he cheated on me with her and left me for her. It was a gut-wrenching blow, but the real kicker came later when he regretted his decision. He came back and told me, the grass isn't always greener. But by that point, the damage was done. He's with her now because, after everything, I wouldn't go back to him. He didn't want to face being alone, so he settled for someone who didn't hold the same value for him as I did. It's strange to think that after all the hurt, the situation ended up being a reflection of what we both really needed. Something more than just temporary satisfaction or comfort. I'm honestly glad I stayed true to my side of the lawn. Story 17. We had been dating exclusively for about 4 months when she married her husband. What I didn't know was that she was already in a serious relationship. We lived together in her parents' apartment, and despite both of us having demanding jobs that caused us to spend time apart, we still managed to maintain a close, loving relationship. We talked every single day, just like any couple would, and our chemistry was undeniable. We often talked about our future and planned the life we thought we'd build together. We made the most of the time we had, even though most of it was spent traveling. I believed we were solid and that everything was moving forward. It wasn't until 16 years later, when she got pregnant with him, that she finally told me the truth. She immediately ghosted me and went to live full-time with her husband. To make matters worse, her entire family blocked me, and they threw all my things onto the street. I had been completely kept in the dark for 16 years. Story 18. She and I had been best friends in high school, a bond that turned into a brief romantic relationship after graduation. We ended things amicably, but we stayed close friends over the years, having conversations here and there to reconcile any misunderstandings. We remained in constant contact for nearly 18 years, always there for each other no matter what life threw our way. We had this silly pact, one of those quirky promises that seemed like no big deal at the time, that if we were both single by the time we turned 35, we'd marry each other. Fast forward to both of us being single, tired of dating, and knowing that we still had undeniable chemistry. We finally decided to stop overthinking things and just go for it, taking things slow but being fully committed to seeing where it would go. We were both all in, and honestly, I never had any reason to doubt her. We lived about 2 hours apart, which was easy to manage with direct flights, so visiting each other wasn't an issue. But after a few months, things took a turn. She had a manic episode and went missing. I immediately called her parents, who hadn't heard from her in over a week. They were out of town, so they were scrambling to find out what had happened. They were sending her sister to check on her, reaching out to friends, and trying to figure out where she could be. In the meantime, I called her work, where she was working at a deli. When I told her boss I was her boyfriend, he responded with, "Well, I'm her boyfriend." That was the moment everything unraveled. She had been living a double life. Her boss was funding her flights to visit her sick family members, which, unbeknownst to him, was actually me, and to see my dying dad, whom she had claimed was her uncle. In reality, she had been taking money from both me and her boss for her travels, using one source to cover up the other. I was in constant contact with her family during this whole ordeal, and once everything came to light, I had no choice but to tell them what had been going on. Of course, she didn't like that one bit. She was furious when her fraud was exposed, especially to her family, who had always trusted her. It was a devastating betrayal, one that shattered the trust one had in her after all these years of friendship and rekindled feelings. What hurt the most was knowing she had been living this lie, all while manipulating everyone around her for her own gain. Story 19. We were engaged, and everything seemed fine on the surface, but over time, I started noticing that he was acting strangely. He became distant, a little more secretive than usual, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was just stress or something temporary, but my gut told me I needed to know for sure. So one day, I took the step of going through his phone. I wasn't proud of it, but I felt like I had to, especially since he'd been so off with me lately. What I found was nothing short of shocking. He had been using Discord to message several women, and as I read through the conversations, my stomach dropped. He'd been talking to them behind my back, telling them how horrible I was, painting me as the villain in our relationship, and to make matters worse, he was showering them with compliments, claiming how wonderful and perfect he was. It was heartbreaking to see him saying things like that, especially when I had always trusted him. Story 20. He would often fantasize aloud about the ways or places my body might never be found. One time, he even said it directly to me, and that moment stuck with me. It felt like a dark thought, one that I couldn't shake. Despite having children together, which means I still have to see him from time to time, I'm fortunate that my now husband ensures we're never alone together. His presence gives me a sense of safety and support that I didn't have before. Story 21. It was our 5th wedding anniversary, and he left his phone downstairs. He later claimed that he knew he'd left it behind, which is why he rushed downstairs as soon as he realized. But when I checked his phone, I found something horrifying. He had recorded videos of my closet, filming my designer bags and luxury items. It wasn't just that, though. He had been offering all of my belongings to escorts, some of their names sounding like they were straight out of a drug-fueled nightmare. That night, he left the house, and when he came back about an hour and a half later, after I had been up, nursing our newborn, I noticed that 2 $100 bills were missing, along with a Prada bag that I've never seen again. He had also posted a Snapchat story. The whole thing was too much. I had been waiting up for him, but all I could think about was how he had gone through my personal belongings, my clothes, my things, and shared them with a stranger. It felt so invasive, so violating. I was completely disgusted by the way he had treated me, and in that moment, I knew I was done. Story 22. She knew that things were tight financially after she moved in with me, and I could sense the urgency in her to find a job. She told me constantly that she was applying to jobs every day, reassuring me that she was doing what she could to help. But when I offered to take a look at her resume or review her application letters to give some advice, she always declined, insisting that she had it under control. Months passed, and nothing seemed to change. I kept encouraging her, but then one day, I found out the truth. She had never actually applied to any jobs. She had been avoiding it out of fear of rejection, letting that paralyze her and keep her from taking the necessary steps to move forward. It was a hard truth to face, especially considering how much we both needed that extra income. Story 23. Every Wednesday, we had lunch dates at the same restaurant. It was his favorite place, he told me, and the only time he was free was at noon on Wednesdays. One week, my phone got stolen at work, but I decided to go to our usual spot and wait for him anyway. While I was waiting, I started chatting with a waitress I hadn't seen there before. Eventually, I asked if I could borrow her phone to let my boyfriend know what had happened and that I was still waiting for him. When I typed in his number, his contact popped up on the screen with a photo of him and his dog in his bed. No clothes on. We both looked at the photo, confused, and said, "How do you know my boyfriend?" It turned out she usually had Wednesdays off but was covering a shift that day. She and my boyfriend had weekly Wednesday dinner dates. Story 24. I discovered that he had been visiting worker girls during our entire relationship. One day, I had an uneasy feeling, so I decided to look at his computer. What I found was incredibly revealing. His email opened up a whole new side of things, and I also found a lot of explicit content saved on his computer. In 6.5 years together, I had never snooped before, as it wasn't something I believed in doing. Here's where things took an unexpected turn. I called my mom and a close friend over because I needed support after my world came crashing down. They were at my side in no time. When he came home, he immediately tried to deny everything, saying, "It's not what it looks like." But there was no sign of remorse, just arrogance. Something my mom and friend noticed right away. Having them there was helpful because they observed things I might have missed. I asked him for his phone, and he claimed he left it in the car. I calmly told him to go get it, and then I followed him outside. He seemed surprised, likely realizing I wasn't falling for his excuses. He didn't have a chance to delete anything because I was right behind him. Ultimately, I realized I couldn't help him with his issues because it was clear he didn't care about what I was going through. It became obvious that staying with him would mean abandoning my self-worth. I stayed just long enough to convince him to share his bank statements with me. I was mainly curious about how frequently he was engaging in these activities, so I had retained a lawyer since we had been living together long enough to be considered common law in my area. The bank statements revealed hidden investment accounts. It turned out he had been accumulating wealth, increasing his net worth by nearly $1 million while we lived together. I was shocked, especially since I had been paying for my own groceries and covering home repairs without being on the title, something I now realize was a mistake. Looking back, I had very low self-esteem when we started dating, but over time, I built it up as my career progressed. I eventually walked away with the dog and a decent settlement. While it was less than I might have been entitled to, I was so surprised by the hidden assets that it didn't really matter. I also know he didn't disclose some of his investments, but I don't care anymore. After about a month of fruitless arguments, I cut all contact. I'm just relieved that it's over. Story 25. Her dad never really died. To be honest, the relationship was toxic from the start. She was abusive, constantly lying, and gaslighting me. Looking back, it's strange that I knew all of this but still made excuses for her. But this last lie was the one that opened my eyes and made me realize I needed to get out. Early on, she told me her dad was very sick. I supported her through it, but it seemed like he was getting worse by the day. She said he had brain cancer. A couple of months later, she told me he passed away. Having never lost a parent, I was devastated for her and tried to be there in any way I could. After the funeral, though she refused to let me attend, she came back to my place in full funeral attire, including a veil, gloves, and mascara running down her face. She talked about the shock of losing her dad, and I comforted her as best I could. Over the next few months, we became closer as I helped her navigate her grief. A year later, the relationship was toxic beyond belief. She cheated, hit me, gaslit me, and isolated me from my family. I was so wrapped up in it that I accepted all of it as my reality. Every time we'd have a break, she'd beg me to take her back and I would. Then, one day during a university lecture, I checked a Facebook message request and my heart sank when I saw it was from her dad. The message simply said, "What are you doing with my daughter?" I thought it had to be fake at first, maybe a hacked account. But as I looked deeper, I realized it wasn't a hack. It was really her dad's profile. Suddenly, everything started clicking. If he was dead, how was this happening? Could it be that he never died at all? I left the class and called her immediately, saying, "Your dad just messaged me on Facebook. What the hell is going on?" She casually admitted that he was never dead, that she had made the whole thing up. I finally saw the truth and knew I had to get as far away from her as possible. There was no excuse she could offer that would justify what she had done. I broke up with her for good. I've moved on and come to terms with how awful that relationship was. Now, whenever a friend tells a crazy ex story, I can't help but feel everyone's eyes turn to me. Story 26. I found out he was secretly married and living a double life. He traveled for work, so we only saw each other on weekends, which made our relationship progress more slowly than I was used to. I was okay with that. He told me that he and his ex-wife were co-parenting and sleeping in separate rooms until their daughter turned 18 and graduated or went to college, which was just a few months away. I understood and accepted that. But after a year of dating, I started feeling suspicious. I brought up wanting to meet his daughter and ex-wife since they were never home when I visited. I had always been prepared to meet them, but despite our relationship being serious by this point, I had never met either one of them. He had said he'd told his daughter about me and that we'd make plans to meet soon. But every time we made plans, they fell through. Then COVID hit, and with the risk of me working in long-term care, I was terrified of spreading it to anyone. That delayed things even more. After an argument, I'd had enough. I found his ex-wife on Facebook and asked her straight up if they were actually separated. She responded, saying, "No, we've been happily married for 11 years, and then blocked me." It turned out, not only was I the mistress, but after I posted about him publicly on Facebook, another acquaintance told me that she was also seeing him. The guy was a pathological liar and manipulator. I really dread the day I run into him, because honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready to avoid doing something I'd regret. Story 27. I found out my wife was secretly living a double life. It all started with my daughter's iPhone, which had been handed down from my wife. One night, while she took our twins to a sleepover and went out with coworkers, I heard the phone buzz and thought I'd charge it for her. When the phone lit up, I saw a screenshot of a text with hearts, and I thought I should just make sure everything was okay. My daughter was only 6, and she used drawing apps on the phone, so it wasn't unusual for her to use an older iPhone. But when I checked, I found text screenshots between my wife and her lover, sent from my wife's phone and synced to my daughter's. The texts were graphic and full of details, My wife was secretly sleeping with a mutual friend over an hour away and was confiding in him. She brought the kids to her friend's house so she could leave that night and hook up with him. I was horrified by the texts, including things like, "I can't stand to be in the same room with him," and "When I say I love you, I actually mean it." There were also texts where she talked about how she was lying to me about her job, saying she'd taken a second job to save up and move out. She even messaged him on New Year's, saying how much she wanted to sneak away and meet him. To make matters worse, I found out she had been secretly telling all of our friends about the mutual divorce she was planning, even though we weren't separated. She was trying to manipulate everyone around her to make it seem like I was the problem. Everyone knew, except for me. This was the same wife I had spent nearly a decade with, going through everything together. She had bipolar disorder, ADHD, and was constantly jumping from one obsession to another, but I stuck with her, believing we could make it work for the sake of our kids. She didn't care how this would affect anyone, especially me. Her selfishness and manipulation destroyed our family. I knew that after this, there would be no more Christmases together. I would miss out on so much of my kids' childhood, and I was left in a house that felt empty and terrifying. As I went through her phone, I discovered that she had been secretly spying on me, using hidden cameras to try to catch me doing something wrong, so she could blame me for the divorce she had already planned. When I confronted her, she broke down and begged for forgiveness. I stayed stoic and emotionless until I got a postnuptial agreement in place. I locked myself in my room for 5 days, unable to sleep, while she begged me to forgive her. I tried to hold it together for the kids, telling myself that I could still be a good father and give them a decent childhood, even if our marriage was falling apart. On our anniversary, she hired someone to write a song about us, asking for a second chance. She blamed her actions on her mental health issues and impulsiveness. I couldn't even bear to be touched by her without flinching. I was depressed, struggling to trust her again. But just over a year later, she did it again, with another guy. This time, we were at a week-long gaming event. She decided to stay another week, while I stayed home with the kids, struggling with work and life. I later found out that everyone at the event knew she was flirting with this new guy and said nothing. When she came home, it was hours later than planned. I was exhausted, trying to manage everything myself, and when she did return, there was no explanation. A few weeks later, she asked for a divorce and moved out. After I had started to pull myself out of my depression and was willing to try and trust her again, she blindsided me with her decision. The final straw came on my birthday. I was spending it with the kids, as she had bailed on her commitment to watch them. Later, I found out she was in another state with the new guy, making it Facebook official the day after my birthday. It's been a year now, and I'm doing okay. I try not to think about it too much, as it triggers panic attacks, but I've come to realize that it could have been much worse. Story 28. A while ago, I was a single dad who would drop off and pick up my kids from elementary school. There was always a lot of flirting with the other moms, but one in particular made it clear she was interested in more. She had just returned from serving in Iraq and was fresh out of the army. She was a single mom with 3 daughters, and her parents helped out with the kids. After about 3 months, things started to seem off. She'd introduce me as her boyfriend to some people, but to others, she'd say I was just a friend. The situation came to a head when she said she was going to visit a friend in the city for the weekend, someone who had just gotten leave from Iraq. I didn't think much of it at the time. This was back in the MySpace days, and we weren't friends on the platform, so I decided to send her a friend request while she was away. When I looked her up, I discovered she was engaged to a guy who was still serving in Iraq. Her latest post was a picture of them together, talking about spending time with his fiancée in the city. When she got back, I confronted her. Her defense was, "I'm just really horny, and doing it with you is really good. So why does it matter? We're never going to do anything more than just sleep together." She didn't seem to care that her fiancé was overseas and might be affected by this. She just wanted to keep things going without any emotional involvement. I couldn't accept that, mostly because I couldn't imagine being the guy in his situation. So, I broke it off with her that day. I didn't tell her fiancé. He was in active combat, after all, and I thought it would be better to leave him in the dark. I kept an eye on their MySpace pages out of curiosity, but eventually, I saw that he didn't make it out of Iraq. After that, I never saw her again. Story 29. She had been taking out payday loans online to fund her gambling habits on an online casino. Then, she'd ask me to deposit money into her account, claiming it was to cover a payment arrangement she made with a collection agency to reduce my outstanding medical bills. I started getting suspicious after she asked me for the 5th time to deposit $600 into her account. My medical bills only totaled $1,600, but I had deposited over $600 5 separate times. Fortunately, the bank teller made a mistake and warned me about something called FirePay. He said it was commonly used by scammers and online casinos for transferring money. I asked him what FirePay was used for, and he explained it was mainly used by online casinos for money transfers. It wasn't until he showed me my account that I realized there were at least 24 FirePay transactions listed. When I told him I didn't gamble online and had never used FirePay, he checked again and discovered he'd actually been looking at my wife's account, since I had made deposits into both of our accounts. I went home and questioned my wife. After a lot of arguing, I finally got the full story. I didn't divorce her right away, but I started sleeping on the sofa more. That was apparently enough to push us further apart, and she ended up cheating on me with someone she met on MySpace back when that was a thing. She told me she was going to visit friends in Illinois, people I knew she was close to. But I figured it out when she mentioned going through a city I often delivered to, and I realized her return trip was 2.5 hours longer than it should have been. She claimed she had only stopped for a quick bathroom break. As a delivery driver, I knew how long it should take to get from point A to point B, and I knew the drive from that city to our home only took about 3.5 hours. After too many lies, I decided to check our cell phone bill. I noticed that every call she made while she was away was either to Nebraska or Kentucky, with only one call being home. Her parents lived in Kentucky, so that made sense, but we didn't know anyone in Nebraska. I had a friend call the number from his phone, using a Vonage service to mask his area code. He made up a fake reason to call, and I eventually found out it was a guy named Chad. Once I knew his name, I paid a girl I knew to call the number from my wife's phone. She imitated my wife's voice well enough, eating M&Ms to make it harder to tell the difference. She treated the call like it was something she'd done many times before, and Chad didn't catch on. Their conversation revealed they had a relationship, and they even trash-talked me, which my wife apparently enjoyed. I confronted her with what I found out. She broke down in tears, begging me not to hurt her, which angered me since I had never been anything but calm and respectful during our 7 years together. I didn't contest the divorce and only negotiated for a fair custody arrangement. I let her take everything she wanted and agreed to pay $400 in child support each month since we had a 50-50 custody arrangement. I haven't dated anyone since then. It's been over 20 years now. Story 30. About 10 years ago, my father received an anonymous letter telling him that my mother had been having an affair for the past 4 years. We didn't have any concrete proof at that time, but my mother had become incredibly secretive, especially with her iPad. It almost became a running joke in the family, the mysteriousness surrounding that device. I even remember one time walking by her while she was using it, grabbing it out of her hands just to mess with her and get a reaction. She immediately jumped up, grabbed my arm, snatched it back, and yelled at me not to touch her things. One day, my mother was out working overtime when my sister noticed that her iPad was unlocked. She couldn't resist and went through it, only to find out that my mother was meeting her affair partner at that very moment. My father called me, distraught and in tears, asking me what he should do. I told him to stay home with my sister and let me handle it. I found the restaurant they were at, turned on my phone to record, and walked inside. There, sitting in a booth, was my mother with her affair partner. The look on her face when she saw me was pure shock. I sat down next to her, ordered a beer, and bluntly asked what was going on. She started to make excuses, but I wasn't having it. I told her I already knew what had been happening for years and had just been waiting for the right moment to catch them. The affair partner, who was married with a family of their own, immediately started apologizing, saying they knew how awful it was and how sorry they were. I looked at my mother and asked why the AP was apologizing when she hadn't even said it yet. My mother quietly said, "I'm sorry." I kept asking questions, recording everything, trying to gather as much information as I could. The next 20 minutes were the most awkward of my life, but I made sure to leave them with a final, cold wish for them to have a happy life. After I left the restaurant, I called my father on the way to his house, stopped by Home Depot to buy new locks for the doors, and then went straight to his house to change the locks. My mother later claimed she spent the night in her car before coming by the house the next day to collect some clothes before moving in with her brother. In the 2 years following the divorce, I became an unofficial mediator, delivering messages and gathering her belongings to drop off. It wasn't easy, but I was the one who could manage the situation. When their divorce was finally finalized, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. The constant role of being a go-between, the emotional strain, and the heartache had finally ended, and I could begin to reclaim my sanity. Today, my relationship with my father is strong, and we are close. As for my mother, things are more awkward. I wouldn't say it's strained, but I do feel a distance. Her choices have caused her to miss out on important family moments, my wedding, birthdays of her grandchildren, christenings, and so on. I'll never know for sure if she would have left my father without my intervention, but I believe the steps I took that night ultimately made everyone's lives better in the long run. I still carry the emotional weight of what happened, and I probably need therapy to process the mental anguish and heartache, but for now, I've learned to say, I'm fine when people ask, and I can live with that. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.